Hey everyone. Before the video starts, I just wanted to come on here and say that I've been trying to upload all of the old episodes of the Clean Palette podcast on here almost day by day to get them uploaded. I've had all the videos, I've been sitting on them. I just haven't had time to upload them. So before I get into the new videos and before I'm able to consistently keep going, I want to get all the old stuff out of the way, all the backdated stuff. You'll be able to see the artworks that I talk about in the interview. But this is with Kim Holm. He is a great artist. We have a great mental health talk that surrounds art and the relationship with art and mental health. But make sure that you subscribe so you can see all the new content that's coming. But yeah, enjoy the video. Welcome to another episode of the Clean Palette podcast. I'm your host, Justice Johnson. Today we have with us Kim Holm. He is a phenomenal artist from Norway. And today I would like to, as I always do, get his origin story, break down some of his work, and then today dive deeper into mental health with artists. So how are you doing today, Kim?
Doing pretty okay,
Doing pretty
all
okay?
things considering.
You know, it was a bit of a time difference. How is it over there? It is about 6 hours different.
It, yeah, it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'm have a little bit of time before the kids come back from school. So
Well, I'm glad that you could come on. I really appreciate it. I know that you have such a busy schedule. I know that you have some art to work on today, so I won't take up too much of your time. So I'd like to just hop into it. So, what is your medium of choice?
well, I fell in love with working with ink when I was just a teenager, and I really wanted to work in like American comic book style, and the whole process of penciling and inking and all of that. And the inking just appealed very much to me, and inking with a brush specifically. And then later I started working more and more directly with the brush, and the things I've become more and more known for now is the work I do directly with a brush. So it's nothing except ink and a brush and
Ink
a
and a
paper,
brush.
and
So,
that's it. But I love all types of different mediums to work with. But the ink is special.
ink
If
is
I had to marry one tool, it would be the ink brush.
so I know that you said that you fell in love with inking when you were a teenager, but when did you get into art in general? I know that you said that comics were big inspiration.
Yeah, so I started drawing when I was 1 year old, and I started talking when I was 3.5. So my priorities were straight from the start. And I always was drawing constantly. I didn't do much schoolwork ever. I just drew in all my books. And when I was 8, I read a Daredevil comic by Frank Miller, and it did weird things to my head, and I felt uncomfortable and queasy, and I knew that I wanted to make other kids have those feelings. I didn't quite recognize what those feelings were until, I guess, a few years ago, but those uncomfortable feelings I felt reading that Frank Miller comic at 8 years old was the feeling of being changed by something. And change isn't comfortable.
So, how would you? Oh, do we still have you, Kim?
I'm terribly sorry that I think some marketer was trying to call me.
um, so I know that you.
Uh,
So that queasy feeling. How would you describe your art style to somebody who has never seen your work before? How would you describe your style aesthetically and like the work that you do
so
overall?
yeah, most of my art is pretty dark stuff. It's pretty based on the contrast between black and white, and kind of uncomfortable shapes often. I'm I've always been wrestling with so part of me wants to do more traditional art, wants to do more academic art, and I've always struggled to become a better artist technically. And whenever I get better technically, I also start getting more bored.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always this contrast between trying to get more technical and trying to get more primitive. So it's this kind of back and forth between the classical technical and the more direct primitive expressionistic.
Did
And
you
it's a lot of monsters and mythology and dark stuff that I like. That's fun for me.
did you study art like academically, or is it all self-taught?
It is mostly self-taught. I did year of a sort of a preschool for the academy, so a private school thing. But I wasn't really there ever. I just partied for a year,
Okay.
and and but I do come from a background where my father is a very gifted artist who did. When I was growing up, he did a lot of pencil artwork. So he gave me a very strong foundation in more classical illustration, or not illustration, but fine arts drawing. And I did, life drawing when I was a kid, and I always had a good backing there. And my mother was or is an art historian, so I got some input there as well.
Oh,
So
so you come from a whole art family.
a whole art family, yes.
Do you have your kids do art? Do you have your kids practice, or do they have
Uh,
their own?
so my 9-year-old, a couple of years ago, he told me, "Daddy, you're not allowed to tell me how to draw. I draw my way." So I let them draw their way, and if they are wondering about something, then of course I help them as much as I can. But both of them are very creative and very much into art and into storytelling and into a lot of the stuff that I'm into. So, for instance, when you see me doing a lot of videos on fairy tales or mythology or stuff like that, often it coincides with the stuff I'm reading for my kids.
Oh, okay.
So, so there's often a connection there.
So as we kind of jump into the pieces you submitted, I noticed that the second
Yes.
one you noted as the daughter of Echidna, and Echidna, if
Yes.
I'm not mistaken, is the mother of monsters, right?
Yeah. Mother of monsters or mother of spiders. Yeah, no, arachne is spiders. Echidna is monsters. Mother of monsters. Yes.
Because I looked into it a tiny bit, and Echidna is a goddess who has the body of a human and a very fair skin, and then the face of a human and very fair skin, and the body of a serpent. And
Yes.
so as we kind of look over at those, I don't know if you have them pulled up or nearby. Let me get those swung up on my phone real quick. Um, Kind of like to jump into the second one first, and then we can go to the first one and the third. How would
Yeah.
you? I always like the artist to kind of describe the piece first before I kind of jump into it. How would you describe your piece, "Daughter of Echidna"?
So the daughter of Echidna piece is one of my daily ink monsters, which is an exercise I do just to keep creativity up during my ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an exercise where I mostly do improvised monsters based on ink splotches. So this one is basically a few random ink splotches
Okay.
that I'm improvised into becoming this sort of half monstrous female figure with this kind of feather thing on her head, which sort of reminded me of the helmet of Hermes or Mercury from Greek mythology. So it sort of reminded me of that sort of helmet, and that made me think about, oh, let's place this vaguely into
The realm of mythology.
mythology.
I like that.
And then I just came up with the name Daughter of Echidna. And I wanted to bring up this specific piece because it was one of the first I did that went viral in a significant way. And I think it was seen by like 2 or 3 million different views
Oh, that is incredible.
on TikTok. Yeah,
Oh.
and it's kind of strange because I didn't put a lot of thought into it. It was just a very spur of the moment thing, and I thought, okay, that came out well, and then people started attaching their stories to it, and at some point I was worried about if I was going to get attacked for it because a lot of people were starting to say, oh, this looks like a Native American and she has these stitches over her mouth. So are you saying that you don't want Native Americans to speak? And whoa, I'm not saying anything with this. I'm just trying to do something creative with the ink. And I mean, there was nothing there really pointing towards Native American at all, except for feathers. But people still sort of attached this to it. And it made me a lot more aware of how much power your art has when you let it loose into the world, and you can't really control it. And and if I could always say, no, this is, I'm basing this on Greek mythology, and it's just an improvised ink monster. But if it had gone the other way around, and they had been saying, oh, this is great because we take this as a symbol of Native American pride,
Mm-hmm.
then I couldn't have just lied and said, yes, that was what I intended. So what do you do when someone misinterprets your art? And do you correct them? Do you just let it go? I don't have any good answers to it. But it was an interesting piece in that it became, or at least had the potential to become something that I never even thought about. And that's scary and exciting at the same time.
So how do you choose your daily monsters?
Yeah. So most of my daily monsters are simply improvised. I don't really have any rules for how I do it, except that they should be done in ink and they should be monsters.
Okay.
And monsters can be anything. It's a very
Broad
loose
spectrum.
word. Yeah, and it can be from the very silly and simple. It can be a eyeball with feet. That's a monster. Or it could go into some very personal areas, some very psychological areas, or it could borrow from mythology or from fairy tales and be sort of a vessel uh, for making these old traditions come alive again. And uh, I I don't usually I don't have any plan. Usually I just make an ink blot or start with a line and see what it becomes. Sometimes I do sit down and say, okay, we had a nice comment about Medusa yesterday, so let's see if I can make an ink blot and make it into Medusa, because that's a fun challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, it's just about improvising and forcing myself to be creative every day. And on a bad day, it can take 5 minutes to do a very silly ink monster, and then I'm done with it.
Mm-hmm. How many pieces of content do you make, or do you feel more pressured to make content with the size of your audience? I know that on TikTok you have almost 400,000 followers, and on Instagram you have almost 10,000. Do you feel any pressure to, keep kind of the art mill rolling, or is it kind of, have you limited yourself to making just what you want to make and kind of cutting it off as soon as you feel any sort of pressure?
That's a good question. Yeah, there is pressure, definitely, but I think most of the pressure is from my own expectations to me.
Okay.
And I do feel like, for instance, my Instagram account is much less active now after my TikTok took off,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't really have time to manage too many social media platforms at once. So it gets neglected in a while. And I do feel some sort of responsibility for the people who have supported me on Instagram and on Facebook for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel bad about abandoning them just because some silly TikTok videos took off. But so I do have that accountability towards my audience, but I am very aware of not letting that rule how I live my life. So um, when I now have almost, insanely many followers on TikTok, which is kind of mind blowing to me. Uh, it doesn't mean that I feel pressure to post so and so many videos per day for them. That doesn't really enter into it. What enters into it is, how can I do all the fun stuff that I want to do?
Because
How can I get time to do all the videos and all the pieces that I want to do? And luckily for me, many artists work on their pieces for 20 hours, 50 hours, 100 hours. And I do have a lot of pieces that I work on for that amount as well. But I also have a lot of pieces that I work on for 15 minutes and I can still show them off. And that's kind of unique. I'm very lucky in that respect.
I know there's I've talked to smaller artists or even bigger ones, and it's this weird, especially with the age of social media and the expectation to constantly post. And I've noticed myself, I've only been on TikTok maybe 2 weeks now. Um, it's this weird thing where art kind of, or the fact that you can put a number to your art and say this many people liked it, this many people have been following me, and it's weird to see those numbers fluctuate, especially when they go down. And I've talked about this on the first interview I did with Cameron Obscura, is that the way that it can kind of take a toll on your mental health with kind of applying your worth and talent to those numbers. So what is kind of a tip to kind of stray away from associating your abilities with the numbers associated with social media?
Yeah, what is a tip for that? If you have a good tip, then give it to me, because I'm struggling. No,
Oh,
yeah, that was a bit of a joke. And if it was a joke, it was funny because it's true. I think that the social media, I think a lot of us have a social media addiction where we do place our self-worth on how each post performs. And I what I try to do, and I'm not always successful with it, what I try to do is make something that I'm okay with, even if it flops
okay.
or even if it takes off. So if it takes off, then I'll be happy about it. And if it flops, then I'll be happy I just made it. So whenever I do a more elaborate video on TikTok, I always have a point that I want to explore myself. That I'm not just saying things and drawing things on TikTok to get reactions. I'm doing it because I want to explore something, and and really for me, it's about, as a person, I'm naturally very good about, or very adept at making excuses for myself, excuses for why I shouldn't do this today, why I shouldn't go out for a walk, why I shouldn't finish this piece, why I shouldn't do this. And I try to take that mentality and twist it around, and instead of making excuses for why I shouldn't do something, make excuses for why I should do something. So I try to make my social media presence be a part of that. Uh, I want to, let's take the Medusa example. I want to read up more about Medusa, and I'll make a TikTok video about Medusa as an excuse
To get
to
in.
learn more about her. So yeah.
I like that. Let's jump into that first piece you sent in. Can you describe kind of what is going on?
Yeah, so this is a piece that I did last summer. It at a live concert with a band called the Bastard Sons of Buddha. And they're very tiny local bands, like local heroes that almost put out an album in the late 80s and are now working on their debut album still. So it's the smallest of small bands in some weird way. But in 2010, I started going out to concerts, to mostly metal concerts, black metal, death metal, kind of harsh, extreme music, and drawing them by the side of the stage. So I'm standing by the side of the stage, headbanging and drawing and trying to capture the feeling of the music and what's happening on stage. And this particular piece I just picked because it is one of the very last concert pieces I've done. It's one of the only ones I've done during the pandemic, where concerts are, a thing of the past, it seems. And I wanted to just have it here as a sort of a reminder that the pandemic is really bad for a lot of people and a lot of artists, but there are industries like the whole touring and concert and live show industries that are just totally devastated. And just this one concert with this punky old guys band playing in a tiny venue in Bergen for 10 people, or I guess maybe it was 20 people allowed in. And the vocalist, Simon, who has worked with black metal artists such as Abbath and stuff, he puts on a show no matter what. And to the chagrin of his girlfriend, who was in the audience, he crushes a bottle on his head and starts bleeding all over the place. And there's blood. You can't see it, much of it on that picture, but there's blood on that picture. There was blood every goddamn where. And he finishes his concert like that, and it's just an amazing, good time all around, bloody good time, as we call it. And I think that that sort of feeling of literally bleeding your heart out or head out for an audience
of 20
people and just giving it your all is something I aspire to. myself, and that I get very inspired by, and that it doesn't matter if it's 10 people or
A
if
thousand, just
it's
as long as you're
a
doing.
million people, as long as you're bleeding for your art in some sense, metaphorically or physically, it doesn't really matter. But as long as you're giving of yourself to your utmost limit, so that's why I included this. Again, it's a piece that was probably done in 15 minutes tops. It is of the face of the vocalist of this tiny local legend band, and but I think it's a good reminder.
If you had to give yourself a span from time to time, how long do your pieces usually take? I know you said some of the daily monsters take about 5 minutes. What is your longest piece? Like, what is on the opposite end of that spectrum?
Yeah, I think that's the next piece I sent you.
The landscape?
Yeah, that's a landscape piece. It's over a meter wide, so it's
Oh, wow.
large for me. And again, it's all improvised. Uh, I didn't have any plan when I started it. I knew it was probably going to be a landscape.
Mm-hmm.
That was the extent of it, and then it was just sitting down and going over layers of finding things in random shapes. So it's sort of like the ink monster process, but just done 1,000 times in one image. And by the end of it, I think I clocked in above 150 hours on
That
one piece. And
that is incredible.
yeah, and I think it's worth it. It
Yeah.
has a very, I can still look at it and find things I don't remember drawing.
So is that piece in your house
So
right now? Do you have it like framed or?
no, it is in my studio, and because of pandemic restrictions, and uh, because of I have to take the bus to the
Okay, the
studio.
public
I've
transportation.
never, yeah, public transportation. I'm never in the studio anymore, so I haven't seen it in a long time.
Gotcha. So let's kind of speaking of the pandemic, how has and kind of transitioning into more of the mental health aspect, how has the pandemic been on your mental health personally?
I was extremely lucky when the pandemic started because I am struggling with bipolar disorder and with frequent depressions. So my bipolar disorder is mostly long depressions
Mm-hmm.
and then some small highs here and there. And in late January, February last year, I started exercising daily and going for daily walks and doing a lot of mindfulness. And I started taking my mental health very seriously, which I do from time to time before everything falls down and crumbles.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the pandemic started, I was in a reasonably good place. And when the lockdowns started, I sort of got into this panic mode of, okay, we are stuck in this house, two kids, my wife and me,
Mm-hmm.
stuck here every day. If my mental health drops out on us, if I go into a depression or up into a hypomanic state,
Mm-hmm.
this will get seriously messed up.
Messy.
This will be a problem. Um, so that sort of gave me the drive to double down on the things I was doing for for the exercise, for the mindfulness, for doing The daily ink monsters are a part of that, and also figuring out how to spend time with the family, because I like my family. They're okay people. I like to be around them even. My kids ain't half bad, but um, my mind doesn't really tolerate being around people too much before
Mm-hmm.
I shut down, and I get overloaded with sensory input. So I had to find new ways of managing that, and uh, it wasn't all good and happy periods. There were a lot of tough times, but I managed to get through a long period without breaking down, and sort of uh, being a part of energizing the family and making us all come through it quite well. And then in Norway, we were lucky that most of the lockdowns didn't last too long. It was a few months,
Because
and then we have reopened most of society with some restrictions here and there.
So in America, we just reopened restaurants. We reopened for a period
Yeah,
and now we shut down again and we're back open at 25% capacity. So
yeah.
last February I was diagnosed with bipolar 1. And so the pandemic was honestly, because I was in a lucky enough situation, I know that is not the case for a lot of people. I was in a lucky enough spot where I didn't have to worry about it too financially. I was in a stable enough spot. So it was really a process, same along goes for you, where I could really just focus on the mental health. And it was almost a break from everything else. I didn't have to worry about going to work. School was towards the tail end of the semester, about to be summer break. So that was at the beginning. Now we're kind of towards a point where this is still going on almost towards a year, and the lockdown has lightened up a bit, but it's still not back to normal. So I just kind of want to bring up that aspect, get your perspective, and kind of see where you were at. When were you diagnosed with your bipolar 2?
I was diagnosed with my bipolar 2, I guess, around 10 years back, somewhere around that there. It was, I wanted that diagnosis because I had been going to therapy for a while, and we sort of figured out that this actually fits.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to fit. And at the start, I was diagnosed as ADHD and bipolar, which is a very typical combination.
Mm-hmm.
And lately, the ADHD has gone away, or not the ADHD, but the diagnosis has gone away because of some specific small things, and I'm still trying to figure out, because I don't really feel that bipolar encompasses all my troubles.
Mm-hmm.
It does encompass. It very accurately describes my rhythms, and I can very, uh, paying good attention for the last 12, 13 years to my rhythms. I can now sense when a depression is coming or when a hypomanic period is coming, and therefore I can sort of set in some safeguards against those. And it doesn't mean that I don't get those periods, but they get more manageable. But there are still, things about how I function as a person that I'm starting to recognize that were huge problems long before the depressions set
Mm-hmm.
in for me. And I'm still trying to, if that's not ADHD, then I'm still trying to figure out what it is. Because the name isn't really important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can call yourself bipolar, and I do choose to publicly say that I am a bipolar artist, I am a bipolar person. Um, but uh, that's for me, that's mostly about finding like-minded individuals
Mm-hmm.
and having being able to see what they have done to get through similar problems. Uh, so I'm not sort of using my bipolar as an excuse for like I'm just this way and it's a disease and I can't do anything
Mm-hmm.
about it. I'm just trying to figure out there are some things about how I function as a person that don't really work with how society is structured,
Mm-hmm.
and where can I find help
Yeah.
to make myself more functional.
I never, when
Uh,
going through your page for the past like week, I never took it as kind of you using it as a crutch in any way. If anything, your page was kind of destigmatizing the nature of bipolar disorder, in my opinion. It was kind of showing what art was for someone with a mental health condition, where like, because there is a stigma between artists and mental health where it is very unhealthy. I know a lot of people that make art that say that they have to be in a bad place to make the art that they need. You need to suffer for your art. And it is a very unhealthy thing to say. So your page was kind of a counteraction of that, where it wasn't saying, I don't suffer, but it was saying, I do suffer, but I also make art when I am happy as well. And I like that about your page. And why do you think that there is that stigma of you have to suffer for your art, or that there is that connection between artists and kind of mental health issues?
uh, it's very easy to romanticize the connection between art and mental health, and it's not romantic. You know, being in a depression means not being able to make art or as much art
Mm-hmm.
as you would when you were healthy. And being in a depression is, it's much more than not being able to do art. It is a really terribly boring and destructive thing. It ruins your life in very real ways, and it ruins the life of those around you. And it's not funny or romantic. But there, I do think that there is a real connection uh, between art and some sort of mental health issues. Uh, and specifically, I do think there are some good things about the bipolar rhythms, where you get these lows where it is very destructive in
Mm-hmm.
those deep depressions, but it's also introspective.
Okay.
You know, when I am down in that hole of down in the deepest of my depressions, uh, my mind is exaggerating many of the faults it finds in the world, in myself, in my art, in my life. But it's still picking out real problems that a healthy mind would possibly just ignore.
Okay.
And then when I go up to my hypomanic periods, I get this burst of energy where I can do a lot of stuff that I simply have more energy than most healthy individuals do.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that leads to an inevitable crash. And for me, again, I'm lucky I have bipolar type 2. So my highs do not have true mania. It does not have elements of psychosis or uh, I don't. I lose touch with reality somewhat, but not completely.
Mm-hmm.
So my main problem with my high periods is that they lead to me not sleeping for a week and then crashing into a depression again if I'm not careful. But still, there is something with experiencing those two extremes of the human condition and experiencing them so regularly that is very much akin to the artistic process itself. When I hear about normal, healthy artists talking about their artistic process, it's always like, I was really excited by the idea, and then I started drawing it, and I hated everything, and I hated my life, and I hated my mother, and I hated God, and then it became better. And you know, most artists deal with this type of fluctuation in the process of making the artwork, and there it's much more contained, and it's much more
stays at the art table.
Healthy. It stays at the art table. That's how it should be. But there is this link there. You have to have this sort of ability to be crushingly analytical of your own faults and your own capabilities and your own potential, and then just be stupidly naive and think you can do everything in the world. You have to have this balance, and I think there's something very creative in there. And the problem with bipolar is, of course, that the lowest end of the depressions and the highest end of the hypomania or mania just destroys your life.
And
that's not sustainable, and it does not produce good art when you're in that extreme end, at least not in the long term. So you have to find ways of managing it. And there's this interesting book called Touched with Fire by a psychiatrist who has studied, it's a very controversial book, and very a lot of psychiatrists don't like it because they think it romanticizes the connection between bipolar and art, but I think it very convincingly shows a statistical connection between bipolar and creative or artistic families. But in that book, you don't want to be one of those artists who kill themselves because of their bipolar. You want to be one of those artists who had a bipolar brother, but themselves were just okay.
Okay, that seems like a nice little middle ground. So I kind of want to touch on the cycles. So when you are in your low points in a cycle, how do you find the motivation to still make art? I know that when I am in a low point, I've been from a high point where I'm making 4, 5, 6 paintings a week where like they're very detailed and I'm going in on them. And then there are points where I'm not quite finished with it and then I crash and I can't work on that piece for 2-3 months, and they're commissions a lot of the time. And so
that's a problem. I have a couple of those commissions right now, and I'm in a depressive period, and I don't have any sort of quick remedies. It's just the grind. You have to push yourself through it in some way, and that's why I'm doing the daily monsters, because the daily monsters, when I'm down, I don't have to be motivated to do one of them.
Just the 5 minutes getting it onto the page.
5 minutes getting it onto the page. Now I've done something creative. That keeps my drawing hand warm, so I don't have to go. If I go like a month without drawing because of depression, then I use half a week to get my drawing hand warm again. To get back in the groove again. So yeah, those daily practices with minimum effort are really important. And then just the grind. It doesn't have to be your best piece.
Just getting it onto the
You
page.
just have to, yeah. And with the commissions, you just have to do the work. And when you notice that you're not going to meet the deadline, suck up to it and call your client and say, sorry, I got hit with a depression. I thought I could work my way through this, but I'm not getting the results I can or I want. So what do we do about it? And most of the time, clients are okay with either postponing things or finding a replacement. And
Okay.
that sucks, but it's better to be honest about it than to go with the guilt and shame of not having worked on.
And just waiting.
You said that you had pieces that you couldn't work on for 2 or 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like 60 days of feeling guilty about not working on that specific piece. That
Mm-hmm.
taints all your other art. That taints your life. That taints everything you do.
Yeah,
But
there's a point where I can, because in the summer was when I first started getting commissions kind of consistently. And there was a point where they weren't very high priced, but I was still kind of getting the pieces out there, getting my name out there. And I was getting to the tail end of my list. I maybe had 20 commissions kind of back to back. Everybody was word of mouthing it. And anytime I would get one, I'd get 2 more orders. And I was towards the tail end of that list and I was working on it. And all of a sudden, it just stopped. And I was almost done with the piece. I was maybe about like 75%. And when I finally got back to it and finally got into it, I immediately messed up the painting because I wasn't in that mode, and I knew that I wasn't in that mode. I was still kind of in the summits, but I told myself like, hey, it's not going to get done. And as soon as I attempted I was rusty. I was real bad. I had to I didn't start from scratch, but I essentially started from scratch at that point. And that was even tougher to basically take all the work I had been doing and ruin it in maybe 5-10 minutes because I not got cocky, but thought that I had the same inspiration that I did before, and just it all fell through to the floor.
Yeah, and that's very. I feel that's very relatable to me because when I'm up, I have a confidence like no other. I believe I can do anything. So I say yes to every stupid thing that I shouldn't say yes to, and I get these stacks of commissions and work that are really too much, and then you hit the wall. And I think one of the things that help for me is trying to figure out what are my reasonable standards for quality. What's the level of quality that I'm satisfied with, even when I'm not down. Even when I'm normal,
Mm-hmm.
this is like a good enough quality. And trying to recognize that quality, and then when my depressive self will not be satisfied no matter what. It will never say, this is your greatest piece. Even if I did make my greatest piece during a depression, it will not be recognized in that depressive period. So I have to sort of figure out, you know, shut up the depression talking and say that no, you're not the one setting the standards here,
Mm-hmm.
and just try to evaluate if it hits my medium standards, if it's good enough. And a lot of times it simply takes more attempts than it should. Like I did a cover art for a small band the other week, and The plan was that I should do it in one attempt because that's always what you plan for,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up using like 3 or 4 attempts, but I shut the early attempts off kind of quickly because I saw that no, this isn't quite good enough. Toss it away. Don't cry over spilt ink, and just try again and try again. And then I got it, and it used a little bit more time than budgeted, but not too much.
I don't.
And
I get that. I get that same feeling when I'm recording one of the more informational episodes of Clean Palette. I try because I don't like to do a ton of editing because my schedule is very hectic. I like to try to get them in as close to one take as I can. And with those 15-minute episodes, the script is maybe about 5 pages deep, 5.5 pages. And I I think one of the first 2 episodes, each one of them took me about 3 hours to make. The 15 minutes, because every time I would stumble even the slightest bit, I would restart the entire clip because I wanted it to be flawless. And after kind of the few episodes, now I'm kind of in a spot where if I do stumble, I'm going to stumble as long as it's not excessive or like I completely mess up an entire sentence or get the information wrong, I'm going to leave it in there. Um, it's become a point where I have to shut off that perfectionist voice or the voice that says like this is not going to come out the way you want to in order to just get it done and be able to produce. Um,
you, you have a very good radio voice.
Thank you.
You have this sort of gravitas in your voice, and you sound like a very professional presenter. That's sort of a danger as well because you're in podcasting territory and you want to leave some of your personality in. And your personality, that is in all those stumblings and mumblings and all those faults. And being comfortable with that is really hard.
It was
Uh,
it was really hard, especially I'm at a point now where I've been doing radio work and voice work for about 4 years now. Especially and I'm still working at getting that stumbling and accepting it. This range right here and this podcast now, this is I had a radio show before, which it's on a hiatus due to the pandemic. I do another podcast, which is very free flow and doesn't have any script. It's just a conversational podcast. And then there's this one, which is supposed to be my informative podcast. And like the stumbling, it was at first like the voice in my head was like, this is not the other ones. You are not allowed to stumble. This is not a point. And I'm still working through allowing myself not to have to be perfect in every aspect of like the vocal range or even my art. And so it's very nice to hear kind of your not necessarily like your advice, but also the fact that you go through something similar and you're not alone in the situation. On the other end of the spectrum, not necessarily at your low points, but more your high points, I would say, how do you not push yourself to burn out? Because I know that if I'm on a streak of where I'm getting up in my cycles and I'm almost at like a peak, I can conquer the world, I can do way too much, and that inevitably leads to the crash or the burnout of you can't make any more art, you can't think anymore. How do you try to level yourself and not hit the peak?
I've become very consistent about monitoring my sleep. So when I start noticing that most nights I try to sleep 7 hours, but I end up like between 5 and 7 someplace. When I start noticing that goes more and more towards 5, and then more and more towards 4, and more towards lower than that,
Mm-hmm.
and I wake up refreshed and full of energy, then I know something is up. Then I know this isn't a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of uh, that's the canary in the coal mine, is when I manage to get by on less sleep. So what I have to do then is try to get in long, intense cardio workouts during the day.
Okay.
Uh, and they have to be long, they have to be intense. And they the reason why, it can also work with strength workout, but it has to really crush your body in a sort of way. It has to
Basically drain all
it
your
has to
energy
be
out.
drain all your energy, so that instead of 3 hours sleep, I get 5. And so I have to use enough energy so that I never reach that point where I don't sleep for 3 days. And figuring out that, and it's especially hard because when I'm in one of those high periods, my ideas start taking possession of me. I get all these wonderful, great ideas, and I can't think about anything else. And I just have to throw away all the commissions and all the work, and just, no, now I'm going to do this painting and only this painting, and it will be the greatest in the world. And then say to myself, yeah, you can do that painting after you spend 2 hours in the mountains running. That's really hard, but so far, that's the best solution I've gotten.
Is
And
just drain yourself.
that was what helped me get through the lockdown period, because I had a very significant 2-week period where my body didn't think it needed more than 2 or 3 hours sleep a night, and by pushing myself to get outside into the mountains and just running through the mires and woods, and acting like a maniac, that that helped me get those few hours more sleep a night, so that when the crash came, it was a sort of a moderately soft crash. I did fall down afterwards, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't fall
Plummet.
completely. I didn't plummet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So one last thing, I know that I didn't want to keep you too long. I know you have a few things to get going. On an ending note here, what is some general advice that you would give to a young artist? Or I'll let you choose this time. What advice would you give to a young artist in general, or what advice would you give to an artist struggling with their mental health?
Hmm. Yeah. To an artist, or to myself struggling with mental health, I think that it is really easy to convince yourself that your struggles are special, and that you can't do this or that because of your condition. You If you was just healthy, you would have been great, or you would have been able to do all the things you wanted to do. And I think, for myself, I have to remind myself that everyone struggles. If you're not struggling with mental health, you're struggling with family, you're struggling with someone you love getting a disease, you're struggling with money, you're struggling with uh, technique. I mean, I'm I was reasonably gifted from a young age, so I didn't have to struggle as much with technique as some others I know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but they took the time and they struggled with the technique, and suddenly they were better than me. And and you know, when you it's easy to become complacent and think that you have talent, or you have these special ideas that only you have, that if you had better mental health, you could become great.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't become great unless you do the grind of working. And when you have a mental health issue, that grind includes a lot of other things that other artists don't have to think about. That grind includes taking care of your mental health. But it's still the same struggle. They struggle with things you don't have to worry about. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all about just figuring out, with my limitations today, what's the best thing I can do? If it's making stupid ink monster in 5 minutes, great. If it's starting 150-hour monster landscape, then good luck. But just figure out what you can do today, and face that specific struggle.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is great advice, Kim. Where can they find you on social media if they would like to, get to see more of your artwork?
You can search out Den unge Herr Holm.
I will put that in the description.
Do that. And you can find that all over social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and TikTok is my most active account these days, and I do a lot of videos there about my ink monsters and a lot of things about mental health, exercise, mythology, or just any weird topic that I can use as an excuse to investigate something I'm curious about.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for being on. I do appreciate your time. But to the listeners, go follow his account. You can follow the podcast at Clean Palette Podcast on Instagram, or you can follow my personal art page on Instagram and TikTok, which is Justice Tries. But until next week, stay creative.